Radio Cambridgeshire.
A woman from Ely, whose father died of AIDS from infected blood, has called on the government for an apology. Elizabeth MacRae's father, Peter, was infected with HIV through blood products he was given to treat his haemophilia. It comes as Eleanor Gray, KC, delivered a closing submission in an inquiry into the scandal on behalf of the Department of Health and Social Care this week. And I'm pleased to say that Elizabeth MacRae is on the line now. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hello.
Tough story, this one. You've lived with this for a long time. How are things now? Tell us what the situation is within your family.
Well, I think we've been a relatively lucky family in the sense that my sister and I and my mother were a very close-knit unit. And at the time when my father died, my nana and granddad lived across the road. So we had a lot of support, which I know other families did not have. So we've been very lucky in that respect.
What is it you want now? And how long have you waited for it?
A very long time, since I was 12, which is when my dad died. And I know other people have been waiting longer because some of these haemophiliacs died earlier than that. So that was 1991 when my dad died. Ideally, what I'd like is I'd like the full truth of what happened to be in the public record. I think it's very important that any future politicians, any future biotech companies, any future medics, doctors, nurses can know the truth of what happened. Because if we know the truth, I would hope it is less likely that something like this could ever happen again.
Talked a lot about this story in the 90s, not just your dad's, but other people's, because there were so many people who were infected, and it was such a big story then. It's gone quiet for a while, but obviously now, with these new proceedings, this inquiry, it's all coming to the fore again. For those that don't remember, too young or need the details reminding, could you just tell the story of your dad and what happened, Elizabeth, please?
Absolutely. So, as you rightly say, my dad was a haemophiliac, so that means you have a problem with your blood clotting, so you don't clot properly. In my dad's case, he was missing factor 8, and he needed artificial factor 8, but in the earlier days, so in the sort of 70s, 80s, and into the 90s, we couldn't make factor 8 in a lab. You had to extract it from human blood. And it does sound rather crazy because I didn't believe it when I first heard it, but I have since seen evidence myself during the inquiry. But in America, some of the larger pharmaceutical companies made these products, factor 8, factor 9, other products, by pooling blood from convicts in prisons and extracting the factor. And of course, if you pool a large number of people's blood to make anything, you're at risk if even one person has something that could be transmitted, of passing that on to anybody who then takes that product. But if you've got a larger population of people who may be infected with a variety of things, then of course you are making a perfect soup of virus to inject into people.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? I mean, it's like something out of a mad sci-fi movie. It's obvious
really
what's going to happen.
I didn't know that when I was younger. And actually, I got my first induction into this crazy world, really, when I worked at Harvard. I took a research job working on infectious disease myself. And while I was there, I attended a lunchtime seminar by a professor who had been portrayed in the film and the band played on, which is about the discovery of HTLV3 or HIV. Yeah. And as the show went on, I realised there were some haemophiliacs portrayed in that film. And I thought, wow, okay, this happened in America. I wonder if that's what happened to my dad. So I started doing some research. I found some people online because, of course, since it all happened, the communities online and the social media have all come together and started sharing information. And I first heard this theory, I suppose, at the time, that the source of these infected products was, in fact, pharmaceutical companies in America. And I thought, that's just crazy. That can't be real. There must be so many checks that wouldn't let that happen. And then we've seen the hard evidence during this inquiry. It's true, which is astounding.
The thing which troubles me is it's so many years since this happened. It's now a full, 6 years since Theresa May ordered this inquiry. Time rumbles on, and you wait for officialdom to give you something respectful in terms of an apology and presumably a compensation package as well.
Well, ideally, all of it, yes, but I think we may be waiting a little while yet. I don't know if you had chance, or if any of your listeners had chance to see any of what was said yesterday by the government's representative. It was very little. They were supposed to have over half a day to present their conclusion to the inquiry, I suppose. The night before, they cut it down to an hour, and then on the day, really, they only did half an hour, and essentially they didn't say anything.
How do you feel about that?
It's infuriating, but I suppose it's not unexpected.
But that's scandalous in itself, isn't it, Elizabeth?
It really is. I mean, literally hard evidence has been seen. Politicians, current and former, have given evidence at this inquiry. So it must be well known throughout government the level of what has happened. And they're just not accepting it, and they're not dealing with it.
Obviously, you've told us partly how this has affected your life, but this has, I suppose, blunted your life, hasn't it? This has had a massive detrimental effect. You've had this living over you, and of course, on top of that, you lost your dear father.
Absolutely, and I was a daddy's girl, so it was very hard being younger. I grew up very, very quickly. But of course, when you're a child, you don't know how to deal with these things properly, and psychological help wasn't really around at the time. So I would definitely say later teens and early 20s were the time when I had to process it all. And one of the things that's the most upsetting is that when my dad died, my mum, my sister and I were called in to see his consultant shortly afterwards, a couple of weeks afterwards, to be tested. We had to have our blood taken. And of course, they were making sure that we had not been infected. We went back a few weeks later for the results, and thankfully, none of us were infected with either hepatitis or HIV. And I think my mum stopped listening at that point, and I don't blame her, because she was so relieved. But what the consultant then said to my sister and I was that, of course, the two of you are carriers of severe haemophilia. And I really don't think, and this is with his finger wagging in our faces, I really don't think you should have children, because you would not want to be responsible for this happening again, would you? And neither of us have had children.
But?
And it's affected both of us.
Yeah.
Despite knowing logically, as I grew up and as I worked in science, that of course you can have children when you carry haemophilia.
Yeah.
It's very hard to get over the impact of somebody in a position of power telling you that when you're a child.
It's a tough story, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for talking to us today about it. I know we'll return to it in the future, and I look forward to talking to you again, hopefully when there's a resolution.
I hope so, and thank you very much.
Elizabeth MacRae from Ely there. What a story.